Okay, so the Etheria Restart developers dropped their big road ahead announcement. Massive news. But the real question is, does this stuff actually address the concerns players have been talking about for ages? We've got this new module reconfigure event coming up, letting you pick substats, main stats, huge, and they're teasing new units, even ones specifically aimed at making Rengokutsu less painful. So today, we're doing a deep dive. Do these promises line up with what players actually need?
Well, yeah, the overall message from the devs is definitely one of commitment. They want the game to succeed long term, and crucially, they've acknowledged the feedback. They're talking about communication, balance, the time sink, the PvP meta, all the big ones.
That's right.
So our job today really is to unpack that. How do these plans actually stack up against the real player experience out there?
Right. A long-term commitment signal, acknowledging feedback, sounds good on paper. But where do we even start comparing these promises to, well, the reality players are living?
I think the first thing that really jumps out is how open they were um, about past mistakes. They specifically mentioned that nerf to Revelation, weakening it, and admitted it had consequences they didn't expect. That kind of transparency, just saying, yeah, we kind of messed that up, that's actually pretty important. It touches on a core challenge for these live games, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, how do you balance the game for the absolute top-tier players who figure out the meta instantly versus the average player who just wants to log in and have fun? They admitted top player experiences are way different from casual ones. It's a tough balancing act. So the real insight, or the question maybe, is whether just talking more can actually bridge that gap. Or does it just end up amplifying the loudest voices?
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Because they are stressing better communication, right? More active dialogue,
Yeah.
involving the community more on things like the RTA meta. But does admitting a mistake actually fix the process that led to it? Or is it more about managing expectations? How does this affect player trust, do you think?
It's definitely a step. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight, though. But acknowledging the problem, that difference between top tier and casual play, that's vital. If they can genuinely use community input to make better balance changes that work for more people, that would be huge. But the big if is whether that process will really be inclusive, or if it's still going to be tricky to capture everyone's perspective fairly.
Okay, let's switch over to something everyone feels: the daily grind. The devs say they hear us, that the end game can feel like, well, a job. They're talking about smarter, less time-intensive farming options for late-game players, though they're hesitant about more auto-clears early on, worried about new player resources, which is fair. And they're actually asking for ideas, like, hey, tell us how to make this better.
Yeah, but it's interesting you say that, because that official stance, it kind of clashes with what you hear from the really high-end RTA players. A lot of them describe the game as needing more time than their actual full-time jobs. Seriously. Some are playing like 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. daily. I've heard people say 17 hours a day during farming events. And often, they totally neglect their PvE builds because they're so focused on PvP, which means their PvE runs take forever, like 8 minutes for a Rengokutsu clear, 15 minutes for Aurora. Stuff that should be faster. It shows this massive trade-off. Focusing on being competitive in PvP actively makes your basic farming less efficient. You kind of have to pick one.
And speaking of making things faster, they did propose something specific for Ember Trek Fatigue, that quest line. Soon you'll be able to auto-clear normal levels you've already beaten. Just gotta do the final boss manually. Hard mode stays manual, though. Seems like a decent quality of life fix, at least.
It is. It's a step. But the core PvE problem runs deeper than just Ember Trek, Player feedback is full of stories about optimized teams, high effect accuracy, and still missing crucial debuffs. All the time. We're talking Vipers with like 250% effect accuracy missing debuffs, Dinas with over 220% failing to land defense down. It just makes PvE feel super inconsistent, super frustrating. It's all down to that RNG, the random chance.
Oh, RNG.
And then there's the shelf farming system for care. Even with recent tweaks like rotating banners, the overwhelming sentiment is still, well, garbage is the word players use. It's just constant bad rolls on the stats you need, and there's no pity system, no guarantee you'll ever get what you want after spending resources. So people waste weeks, months even, chasing decent stats. It feels pretty bad.
Yeah, it sounds like a real disconnect. Players tell us they just want to hit go, burn their energy, and be done, but the system forces you back every, 5, 10, 20 minutes to restart runs. It feels like it doesn't respect your time at all. Exactly. And that PvE burnout, that's critical. It kills retention, especially for more casual players who just don't have that kind of time.
Right.
But even the hardcore players, the ones with jobs who spend money, they feel it too. They argue the game needs to cater better to casuals to survive long term. So it raises that big question for any game like this. How can you be successful if the main thing you do, the core farming, feels like a barrier instead of, part of the fun?
All right, let's pivot to PvP. The devs are saying this is going to be the core focus for years. Big statement. And interestingly, they're considering mid-season balance patches now. That's a shift from their old only between seasons rule. They mentioned the Lilium adjustment is kind of setting a precedent for being more flexible. And again, they're asking for feedback should they nerf Bloodbath a bit in PvP, buff some unused DPS shells, maybe even undo that Revelation nerf if enough people want it. Yeah, and this is where it gets really complex.
Yeah.
Because high-ranked players, they're saying the meta is just swamped by bruisers. Like 85–90% of teams are these tanky damage dealers. They feel it's less interesting than the old triangle meta with more distinct roles.
Yeah.
And the Revelation nerf we talked about, lower ranks might have wanted it, but top-tier cleave players felt punished. They already had counters, like the Lighthouse Shell. So it just shows how hard it is to balance for everyone at once. So it's like two different games sometimes.
And one piece of gear keeps coming up. Bloodbath. Players seem to think it's just fundamentally broken. That 55% damage reduction basically doubles health, making it almost essential on everyone. Kills build diversity, right? Plus, there's the whole issue with control effects CC like sleep or stun. People feel it's unfair because there aren't great ways to cleanse it, and effect resistance feels broken. Even if you stack that stat high, you're still, quote, at the mercy of RNG.
Right. And that begs the question. If high effect resistance still doesn't reliably protect you, how do you actually counter units like Kazuya the Reverie? He can just point and click sleep your whole team for 2 turns. Strategically, what's the play against that if resistance is just a clone flip? And then you add healers being super strong, especially with shells like Gigabyte and Supernova. It stretches RTA matches out to 20, even 30 minutes sometimes. It creates this stall comp meta. And the feedback from high ranks is clear. It's just tedious. It's not fun. It turns PvP into a slog.
Okay, but on a more positive note, they are making some big moves on gear and customization. That sounds promising. The module Essence Shop is getting revamped, letting you buy modules where you know the main stat is subs. That reduces RNG. And a new gear crafting system, also meant to cut down RNG, is coming as a monthly event. Plus, that new unit specifically designed to help with Rengokutsu and other tough PvE. Details apparently coming this weekend.
Yeah, those customization changes. Definitely positive steps. Less RNG is always good. But the elephant in the room is still lattice scarcity. That's the material you need to upgrade gear. Players are saying it takes like 2 months to fully build out a single character because lattice is so rare. That's a huge time gate. And when you combine that with the current RTA meta issues, well, there's not much incentive to even play RTA,
Sure.
especially when the weekly rewards from the PvE-based AI arena are often better.
Oof. And RTA matchmaking issues.
Oh, yeah. Queue times can be insane, like 30 minutes at high ranks
Yeah.
just to fight the same few people over and over. So even though they say RTA is the core of the actual experience, it doesn't feel very rewarding for a lot of players right now. If it's the core, it needs to feel like the core, you know?
Definitely. So wrapping things up a bit, the devs are hitting hard on improving communication, involving the community, saying feedback directly shapes where we go from here. They also touched on monetization, promising future stuff will focus on value, choice, utility, ideas like cheap daily stamina packs, weekly shop changes, and they're gearing up for a big global launch celebration too, making the game available more widely, promising big rewards. Good time for new or returning players, maybe. So what's the bottom line here? Where does this leave Etheria Restart?
Well, look, this is where it gets real, isn't it? Players want more than just promises. We've heard feedback about past events feeling kind of soulless, just recycled content, without the fun or generous rewards you see elsewhere. And yeah, better monetization is welcome, but the game's basic economy, particularly how hard it is to get those chips for module rerolls, it makes even dedicated spenders feel like they're constantly running on empty. So the big question is, can they really deliver on being player first without rethinking some of those fundamental economy and reward loops? Because that's what affects how players feel about their time and money investment.
It sounds like there's a lot of potential outlined here, but also some really deep-seated problems they need to tackle.
For sure. The developers have laid out a path, they've acknowledged a lot of the big concerns players have raised, and they're proposing concrete solutions. They're clearly listening and trying to fix things that aren't working.
But when you dig into the actual player feedback, like we've done today, you see just how big that challenge is. You've got the PvE fatigue from RNG and long grinds, a PvP meta that many find stale or frustrating, and this underlying resource crunch. There are some serious hurdles for Etheria Restart to overcome if it wants to really hit its stride long term.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a final thought to chew on. What does it actually take for a live service game like this to truly thrive? Not just survive, but thrive. How do you balance making money, respecting player time, and keeping the competition fair and fun? Especially when your players range from super casual to hyper dedicated. Something to mull over while we wait and see how these changes land.